Bolovinaka, Namaste, and good afternoon. This is Fijivillage Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan, and this afternoon we have a special Straight Talk focusing on the week. As you know, that Girmit celebrations are underway with a few events already taking place. The Girmit exhibition underway at Albert Park, and we expect events to be rolling out. The place to be will be Albert Park if you're looking for something to do this weekend. On Saturday, a whole lot of activities planned. And on Sunday, we have the National Reconciliation and Thanksgiving service organized by the Methodist Church of Fiji at the Vodafone Arena. And on Monday, we have a Girmit parade in the morning, starting from the flea market at around 8 o'clock in the morning, Girmit Day public holiday, and then things culminating with the official program at Albert Park, where the Prime Minister will also be addressing the nation. Tonight, we are grateful for our guests to accept our invitation and coming out of their busy schedule. So thank you, Marama, Roko, Dreketi, Teimumu, Kepa, for availing yourself for Straight Talk. Assistant Minister for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, and the Girmit Chair for the celebrations, Sashi, Kiran, and Dr Anurag Subramani, well-known USP academic, historian and writer. We're looking forward to the deliberations that will take place today, and hopefully that we gain a lot of knowledge out of this session, and also the questions that you may have about Girmit. Girmit written history, May 14th, 1879, that's 144 years ago, the first group of indentured laborers arrived from India. Following these, several groups arrived, and up to 1916, and according to written history, close to 60,000 indentured laborers had come in from India, mainly to work in the cane plantations to build the sugar industry. At the end of the indenture system, or Girmit, people either stayed back to build their lives here or returned to India. Girmitiers, or indentured laborers, is a name given to Indians who left India in the middle and late 19th century to serve as laborers in the British colonies. And the word Girmit comes from agreement. A lot of people still asking what is the emergence of this word, where did it come from, does it exist in the dictionary? So it is born out of the word agreement. Appearing on our show, as I've told you, the three guests will be looking at different issues, where we have come from, what we have been through, and where we are going. So straight into it, Teimumu. There are differing points of view on Girmit and whether we should have celebrations or commemorate it with a public holiday this year. What are your comments on the start of the Girmit era in Fiji?
Thank you, Vijay. For us in Rewa, growing up in the village, we had Indian shopkeepers and people who were involved in the fishing industry. So we were familiar with the Indian people involved in commerce. So, looking back at that time, they got on well with us, and we got on well with them. We were all part of the village setup. So, going into school and then meeting Sashi, fast forward to 2015, that's when I started really looking at how we could make a difference in the history that we were living through, especially with the Girmit descendants, because from growing up in the village, we also heard that my village is not anywhere near Nevelada, where the Girmit, on the reef at Nasilai, and it was the Nevelada people who went out to save them. We just heard this as part of a story growing up, not knowing really what it was about until I met Sashi, And then we got into the history of it. I think because this was not taught in schools, so there was not much interest in the history in Fiji. I was brought up with a British curriculum, so we learned more of the British history, and then New Zealand and Australian history rather than the Fijian history. So for me, living here now, this is part of the living history, which I'm very fortunate to be here at this time. That's how I see it.
Assistant Minister, you would know, you were sitting as the Girmit chair, organizing the week celebrations, the differing points of view on Girmit and whether we should have the celebrations or the public holiday. What are your comments on the start of the Girmit era in Fiji?
Thank you, Vijay. I think it's true we need to pause and commemorate. We need to celebrate the Girmitia heritage, Girmitia contributions to Fiji and nation building. So there's a lot to celebrate. But we've gone to a very painful era. So, and sadly, for the most part of my life, when we hear about the word Girmit, it seems like an era that ends at a particular point and then there's us. For the longest time, we have not really connected ourselves to the Girmitia, so that is my identity. So I'm grateful that we have a national holiday. I'm grateful that we can look back at our history, own our history, and know where we belong. I belong to Fiji, but I belong to the Girmitia descendants. So that is important to recognize our history and celebrate my identity, celebrate us as a people. So I'm quite comfortable with this. And Vijay, over the time since I've been watching the cool culture in 2000, the pains of 2000 in particular, I think our people are traumatized with the Girmit stories. And we have kept this intergenerational trauma that we never pause to remember and heal and own. So for me, it's a very important day and important holiday.
Dr. Anurag, how do you see things? Of course, we'll look at the history first, and you are a historian. What's your view on the Girmit era?
First of all, it's very important that we look at indenture and the history of the Girmitias as a global system. We cannot detach it from history and the historical processes. It is tied to capitalism, it is tied to European expansion, and it is tied to the expansion of the British Empire. The indenture system was a coercive labor system. It was a coercive labor system that brutalized so many people. It was a system that enriched and impoverished. It is a system that accepted and excluded, and also it is a system it was a system about power and repression. So millions of Indians were turned basically into beasts of burden or working bodies for the enrichment of the British Empire. When I talk about the British Empire, I talk about the plantocracy, I talk about the rich families, the aristocratic families. I'm talking about the bankers. This whole system gave rise to banking. I'm talking about the insurers, and I'm talking about also something that a lot of people don't talk about is the monarchy. The monarchy, the British monarchy, and slavery, indenture, and exploitation of other commodities is linked. That is a proven fact. So I'm not against marking the day with a public holiday or national expressions of pride, etc. But there are two things. In the United States, the country does not celebrate slavery. The country celebrates the end of slavery, which is June 19th. They call it Black Freedom Day or Emancipation Day. I think, first of all, the public holiday, etc., is fine, but wouldn't it be better suited if we celebrated it on January 1st, 1920, at the end of Girmit, when the last indentured laborer was freed, and call it something like Emancipation Day or Freedom Day or Commemoration Day, rather than celebrating it on May 14th, when the Indians first arrived, because what were they arriving to? They were arriving to bondage. They were arriving to a system that was so brutal that it controlled every movement. There were two Fijis in that era. One Fiji was for the indigenous population and the Europeans. The other Fiji was a highly regulated system for the Indians. They were not supposed to lead this highly regulated system, which was a system of power and control. It was a system of brutality. So these are the two things. I think, how do we celebrate Girmit? I think we should mark the day rather than celebrate the day with reflection, contemplation, and also remembering, because I think remembering is the key, because we as a nation and as a species seem to suffer from historical amnesia. We have forgotten the past. I mean, this is glaringly obvious to me, teaching history and literature students in high school who have no awareness of history. They have no awareness of where they're coming from.
We'll go deeper into that.
Yes.
You won't just get one chance to
Absolutely,
answer
sure.
the whole issue that's at hand. We'll go to the issue about whether people fully appreciate and know what people went through during that time. Assistant Minister.
No, I think generally we don't, while there is a whole narrative on Girmit, and when we think about it, there's a general feeling amongst the young and old when we talk to, that there was suffering, that there was a form of slavery. But there are two parts to it. One, people came, they suffered. And then there's a second part to it where when I'm hearing the indigenous people, the chiefs, the church say, the Girmitians contributed to this nation building. And the descendants of Girmitians contributed to this nation building. And that's something we need to remember and celebrate. So that's why I said, the date is important to commemorate and to remember. But also, after a lot of conversations, it's important to celebrate the contribution. And I think that makes us comfortable with who we are in terms of our identity.
Dr. Anurag, back to you about whether people fully appreciate and know what people went through. You just touched on it. A lot of people may not really know what happened. And if we don't have this, then people will remain in the dark.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, the indenture system was a coercive labor form, which was a brutal labor system. And as soon as we kind of disentangle, so the indenture system was not a convenient system that was set up for Fiji's prosperity. It was part of a global capitalist system. And under this capitalist system, you had countries like Portugal and Spain who first went and set up Atlantic and the Caribbean colonies. And then they set up what we call the plantation system. In order for the plantation system to work, they needed slaves, they needed labor. So slaves were brought. When the slavery ended in the British Empire in 1833, Britain started a new system called indenture, which was a concealed form of slavery. A concealed form of slavery at the behest of the plantocracy, who wanted a regular and cheap labor supply, similar to what they had experienced under slavery. So you can see, from the very beginning, the intention was to work these laborers to the maximum, extract the maximum profit from them, and also basically to turn them into working bodies. So Girmit is always tied to the idea of brutality. It is tied to the idea of a coercive labor regime. You cannot detach it from that. Vijay, one of the problems in Fiji, as I said, is the idea of historical amnesia. Okay, people have seemed to have forgotten about the past traumatic events, or they kind of half remember. One of the biggest issues for me is the way history is taught in high school. I've been looking at the history textbooks, and it was supposed to have been revised, but it is whitewashed history. It contains a lot of gaps and silences. For example, the whole page in Form 4 history book devoted to indenture is basically one page, whereas 31 pages is devoted to a history of Tuvalu, Tokelau, and Kiribati. This is ridiculous. Historical consciousness, students need to develop historical consciousness. What is the difference? At the moment, students are acquiring historical knowledge. So they rote learn things in high school and they regurgitate it during exams. But when they go out of the school system, they have no awareness. They have no idea of the larger forces. They learn the how. They learn the when and who, but they're not learning the why.
And the why is the most important thing. Teimumu, you touched on this, that came through a British curriculum system where a lot of information is left out. I think that's in agreement there. Do you think that people fully appreciate what the people from India went through when they came in?
I think with the non-descendants of the Girmit here, we know very little, other than what is in the textbook, as you have alluded to. And then for those who have not visited the museum, where some of the information is stored, people in general would know very little about that part of our history. So I think we have to go back to school, where it needs to be taught and put into the context of our history. Otherwise, it'll be just a day that people find is a good public holiday. You can enjoy another day out of school, out of work, but as far as the Girmit years are concerned, they will continue to know very little. So I think we have to go back and have it taught in the schools.
So the Education Ministry has got its work cut out as well. Apart from that, though, that's the younger generation. We have to address the others who have come out of the school system and still do not fully appreciate what has happened. Dr. Anurag, what are the lessons that we should learn from those times?
The lessons that we should learn, obviously, is the idea of humanity and treating people in a humane manner. As I keep on reiterating, the whole system was devised, the indenture system was devised to basically, so the narrative, the grand narrative that the British spun was this, that when we're colonizing countries, we are there to spread education, we are there to spread religion, we're there to spread progress and enlightenment. This was the narrative, this was the myth. It was called the civilizing mission. But really what it was, what Britain was doing, so Britain was not really a philanthropist. Britain was not a benevolent power. Britain was not driven by humanitarian goals. Britain was driven by a need for profit on the part of its shareholders. Basically, British Empire was a corporation, and it was driven by a need for profit for its shareholders. So basically, what it did was it drove people through this coercive labor system into bondage, but said, we are here to spread civilization. So any kind of atrocities, historical atrocities, what do we learn from that? The genocide of the Jews in Nazi Germany, the genocide of the Armenians by Turkey, what is happening in the Middle East, the wars that have happened in Iraq, in Syria, what is happening in Israel and Palestine, the coups that we have gone through. The whole idea is to learn from history, isn't it? So, there's a truism. If we do not remember the mistakes of the past, we are bound to repeat the mistakes. And I believe that is true, because I don't need to remind anybody about the upheavals Fiji has gone through. If we look beyond our borders, we see wars fueled by ethno-nationalism and greed. Okay? And despite the end of slavery and despite the end of indenture, coercive labor forms still persist in this world. We have not learned from the mistakes of the past. For example, very quickly, the International Labour Organization says 21 million people are trapped in coercive labor systems today. These include human trafficking, sex trafficking, child labor, debt bondage, modern-day slavery. These coercive labor forms also exist in Fiji, like child labor. So have we really learned from the lessons and the mistakes of the past?
Thank you, Dr. Anurag. Teimumu, what do you think are the lessons that we should learn from those times?
I think, going forward into the future where we have to learn that we have just to make a change in our mindset, in our attitude, those of us who grew up in those days where we knew very little of what happened during the Girmit times. And with children today, like you have been saying, they know very little of our own history. So I think we just have to go back and teach it in schools so that we learn from the past, going forward into the future, and how we learn to get on with one another.
Ms. Kiran, you are the Girmit chair and also in the coalition government. What are the lessons learned? We are around this table now. There's comments made about what we should be doing, but what are some of the lessons learned now? Public holiday has been declared and celebration is occurring. What is the big message there?
For me, I think when I started speaking with the chiefs and with the indigenous population, their lack of knowledge about our history and our lack of knowledge about their fears taught me a lot. And when you looked at 2000 or the upheavals, one of the things that happened was our people came, nobody sought the permission of the Vanua. It was done at some level, but the Vanua, nobody sought the permission, we were dumped there. Our numbers grew, they had fear, we had fear. Our children are scared still to date. If a child is naughty, they'll say, the Fijian men will take you. The Fijian child is told, the Indian men will take and eat you. So one of the things for me is the importance of communication and how do you manage relationships in a nation like ours. British may have been a player, but that's history, they're gone. Coups have happened, they're history, they're gone. There are certain things we have to learn and look back and change. We have been living in this whole narrative of stereotypes. Fijians are like this, Indians are like this, and we still continue 144 years later. So for me, if that communication in the leadership, and our ancestors, when they came, they were fighting the British, then they started fighting for their rights, and we remained in that mode of, aggression. We did not appreciate the environment we were in. And it's rightly so. I mean, there's no judgment to it. But for me, the lesson is, one, knowing our identity and appreciating our identity and being comfortable in it, but also being able to communicate with the other ethnic groups and learn about them to build the relationships. I think lack of the relationships and communication has resulted in the many upheavals we've had.
We'll talk about Fijian and Indian because I know people would be a bit confused. The Fijian that has been freed, we are talking about that era at the moment, and of course after that legally everyone is known as Fijian. We'll go into that area. There's my question, Teimumu, on May 11th and 1884 when the Syria, as you said, you knew very little about it, about the Syria coming from Calcutta carrying 497 indentured adults, children and infants. According to written history, the Syria was wrecked on Nasilai Reef as a result of inexperience and poor navigational facilities. And according to the records that we see, fluid information, 59 people died in the tragedy. The bodies are buried at Naivilada village, and there's an event as part of this week's commemoration where Naivilada village has been declared as a peace village. Your comments on the significance of what happened in Naivilada and why we need to continue to educate people on it.
I think when that happened in 1884, it was fortunate that Christianity had already arrived in Northern. So in 1840, that was when the Tinoda was accepted Christianity. So that in 1884, I think most of the people in Northern would have been Christians by that time. So it made it, in my view, easier for them to accept that these were people that needed to also be looked after. They were human beings, like the rest of the people there in Rewa, so that it made it easier for them to look at the indentured laborers who were on that boat, to treat them like other human beings. That's my take on that. Had they not been Christians, I think it might have been a different story, because we know that in 1874, Fiji was ceded to Britain, so this was 10 years later, and Norther was already had missionaries there, so that it became very different in the way they looked at the event, that the disaster, the catastrophe that happened on the reef. So if they were not Christians, it might have been a different story. So they were able to bury those who had died in the graves, not in a mass grave, but individually. So I think Christianity had a major role to play in the way that the people who went on the reef, they were able to be treated there and then taken to Suva.
Ms. Kiran, this event, Navilala village, declared as a peace village, and need to continue to educate the people on it. What's your stand on that?
So for me, when I was talking to the elders on both sides, and in those days, our people looked different, they looked different. Why did they respond? And people wounded were living there, and they still clean our graves, our forefathers' graves, when they clean their graves. That tells me about a relationship they had. And when we approached the Inodo, that was the first thing he said. Your people are buried here, they turn into land, we belong to that land, you belong to that land, so you belong to us. That was the first time we'd heard the word belonging. So they've been very open. One of the things I realized when I started going into Fijian spaces is I don't know, I've never entered a Fijian village. I don't understand, our hall has different doors and this rara and all this. So this village said, we are willing to educate. So, and for the last how many years, we've been talking about a living museum where there'll be stories of both of the ethnic groups, but they're willing to educate us about the ceremonies, they're willing to take us to the reef, they're willing to take us to the gravesite and talk about their culture and religion to sensitize us. And one of the things when we were talking to the Turanga, Tuinodo at that time and the chiefs of Rewa, they said, we knew so little, like there are certain things we Indian people of Indian origin do that's insulting to the indigenous community. And they said, oh, we didn't know that you did not know that this is a sensitive issue. So what it taught me was it's important for us to come together to learn intercultural behavior. And Navilada has put their hands up and said, we are willing to be the educators because we've had your people in our land, buried in our land for about the last 100 years, and we feel responsible.
Dr. Anurag?
I think the ladies have said quite enough about that. But I mean, what is exactly your question?
Does Navilada hold a significant part of history based on what happened in 1884 on May 11th?
Yeah.
The declaration of the village as a peace village now, and trying to get that information out to the new generation or the younger generation.
Symbolism is always very important, right? And in a country like Fiji, a multi-ethnic country, any acts of cross-cultural reaching out, any acts of reconciliation are good for the nation. And so is this.
You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. We'll be back after this break.
Download the all-new Fiji Village app. Get the latest news direct to your mobile. Get the latest sports updates from our scoreboards online. Navigate easily through our categories. Watch videos from Straight Talk interviews, local music videos, sports, and many more. You can now easily listen to your favorite radio stations from your phone. Download the all-new Fiji Village app right now.
Welcome back. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Our guest tonight talking about Girmit, Teimumu, Kepa, Sashi, Kiran and Dr Anurag Subramani. In 2017, the descendants of the Indian indentured laborers or Girmitiers who survived the wreck were recognized as the Luvendra Naratu, or the children of the chief by the people of Rewa. This was a symbolic moment because it was the first time that the Girmitia were formally recognized in the Itoke custom. Now, Sashi, you were part of that event in 2017. What are your thoughts on this development, and do you believe that this has resulted in better race relations?
Absolutely, I think so. This development came about by many conversations we were having with Turanga Tuinodo and the indigenous community after the initial Rewa Day, where we were adopted as a people of Rewa. And one of the things that when we're talking about identity and sense of belonging, we explained to Tuinodo that we didn't like the word Belangi, or we felt affected by the word Belangi. I know the word Belangi has its... So then they explained to me that in a Vewakani, in a relationship, when they belong to Tao or Matangali or whatever, there is normally a connectivity to the Vanua, or a chief is representing the Vanua. So after a lot of conversation, one day they called me, and I would go and sit there and they'll have all this conversation, and said, Tuinodo was, if you remember him, he was very straightforward. And he just said to me, Sashi, for you to belong to this Vanua, it's important you belong to our Vewakani, and I will give you my identity. And while I didn't understand the full magnitude of what it meant, it was a very emotional moment. So then the Vakatokayada happened, where he gave us his identity, his Idavuti, connecting us to the Vanua. And within a week, I was in Ra for a different activity, some work. And I came out of the hall, I was going in the car, and there was a line of people willing to shake my hands, just to say, Bula Neita, Aranayandro Neita, you belong to us. You belong to the Ratu, you are our Neita. And then each village, each community I started going to, people started explaining to me the relationship of the Vanua and how the different provinces worked. And for me, that was a huge learning and another level of belonging to the land and the people. So for me, it meant a lot.
Dr. Anurag, your thoughts on this development that happened in 2017. Do you believe this has resulted in better race relations?
I've always thought that Fiji is a work in progress. It's a project which is work in progress. There will always be ups and downs. There will always be people who are... not everybody will be happy with everything that is happening all around. But as I said, this little things that we do, these little gestures that we do to extend our hand to other communities, I think is very important. It's very symbolic. And, I think these kinds of gestures are good. But I think in order to really get rid of or eliminate suspicion between different communities or a fear of each other, kind of xenophobia that we have in Fiji and other countries, in order to totally get rid of that, we need to do other things, such as, for example, I always felt, and being an educationalist, I always go back to the education system. I think we need to do a lot more in school to promote cross-cultural learning. I know that's already started, but for instance, like one of the areas of suspicion in Fiji is the fact that we do not understand each other. We do not understand each other's language. In places where people do speak each other's language, when they reach out cross-culturally, you will see there's less suspicion and there's more understanding, because as a child, I visited the West and the North, and I had, family who spoke Fijian language and villages who spoke Hindi fluently. I did Fijian. I studied in Suva Grammar School for 1 year, and then, I did not. I'm learning the language again. I'm doing my part to kind of, help in reconciliation, my part by trying to learn the language now again, so many years later. So I think these gestures are fine, these national gestures are fine, but we also need to get to the root of the issue. And the root of the issue is a kind of a suspicion that exists because of a lack of kind of understanding each other. And it all lies in, I think, the language itself.
Teimumu, it was historic Itoke Customary Act that was done in 2017. your thoughts on that development as the head of a confederacy in Fiji, one of the highest chiefs, or the highest chief in Fiji, and being coming from the Itoke community. What do you think was the significance of that ceremony, and what has resulted from that?
I think, going to 2017, we had to go back to 2016. And 2016, the Tuinodo had accepted the Girmit group to come in and have this conversation with them, and that they would be a part of Nodo. And we had been talking the whole time. So we spoke with Sashi and said, for this to happen, it has to happen on Rewa Day, where everybody from Rewa comes together. Every 3 years, if you miss this opportunity now, you'll have to wait another 3 years, rather than just coming to my home where only a few people will be. So we talked about it, that the acceptance by the Tuinodo, that they be a part of Nodo, and then the people of Nodo would bring them to Rewa Day. And that was very important for all of us, because the whole of Rewa was there. So this acceptance by Nodo became an acceptance by Rewa, because the people from Nodo brought them to Syria Park very significantly. And that's where we started. So then with 2017, 2018, and where we are now, we had to go back to Rewa Day, the acceptance by the people of Rewa, so that it wasn't acceptance just by a group. It had to be the whole of Rewa. So then when 2017 came, that they would be given this name, which belongs to the people of Nodo, and that's how they are known by the rest of us, Luvendra Naratu, and that was the name that was given by Tuinodo.
How can there be widespread ownership of this term, Luvendra Naratu?
So Luvendra Naratu, Tuinodo told us a story of that time, of how children, like people of Indian origin, were addressed in their province. And I think a lot of that has to be education. Education not only in schools, but that time when we were actually coming into a dialogue. We had Turangatokes from Rewa and people of Indian origin all sitting in Lotoka. We had a few of these conversations where we actually dialogued, and we talked about how we feared certain things, we didn't understand certain things. And they talked about their fears, they talked about their insensitivities as adults. So while children are learning in schools, and there was so much shift we saw in the both ethnic groups because our dialogue began. And then this shared story, one of the elders shared a story about how he used to get really angry about certain behavior of somebody who used to come to his house. And that was, then he began to understand why he lacked that knowledge. So I think once there's more dialogue and education, not necessarily only in school, at different levels, and once we normalize this behavior, this name, it'll be something that people will identify with. But that depends again on rural, urban, peri-urban. And having said about language, I have met people who know the language, but they still don't understand the sensitivities of a village. So there's a lot of work, dialogue, education that needs to happen. But more than anything, ownership. Like when I go to Nodo, and I'd never been to that area in my life, not part of my work history, the love I felt, and I've gone many times alone because Tuinodo will give a message, we'll have this crisscross communication, I've arrived. I was taken to the Syria wreck and the graves by the indigenous men I didn't even understand at that time. But they developed a relationship. When they adopted me and our people, there's a love and respect you just walk into. And once we start evolving that love and respect, and understanding as humans we will make mistakes, that love and compassion is important. The shift is important.
Teimumu, widespread ownership of the term Luvendra Naratu and acceptance from both sides?
I think after what happened at Syria Park, Sashi told me that they scrolled through, I think, social media to see what people were talking about in terms of what happened at Siripak, she told me that, well, there was hardly any negative comments that came through. And I said to her, you know, that I shouldn't be surprised, or maybe I should be surprised, because Butanroka, whom we all, I think most of us remember what Butanroka was like, and there were still some Butanroka diehards in Rewa at that time, but nobody said anything. So to me, it was a general acceptance by people, by Rewans especially, that it was something that they felt good to be a part of. And to me, a lot of interaction has to take place where we are visiting one another. Sashi came to me the first time and asked, you know, what should I do? When I come to Rewa, what should I do? What should I say? I said, you know, with us, a lot of it is observance. You just sit and listen and you watch what people are doing. And I think Sashi has done very well, and the people that have come with her, in terms of us trying to learn from one another as to how to behave, how to accept one another.
Vijay, if I may add, it's the indigenous people who've accepted this better because the chief said so and something happened and there's a shift. Our people are in different spaces in that. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen on our people to understand what actually happened, what is the meaning, because we've been disconnected for a long time. So for it to become a norm, there's a lot more conversation that needs to happen on our side.
Dr. Anurag, from your point of view, you said, you know, language is important and all these other factors that play, ownership and acceptance is important as well. What are your thoughts?
So I didn't say that learning each other's language will get rid of all the ills of this society. I didn't say that. What I'm saying is that that is just one of the things that we can do. And learning each other's language is crucial. It is crucial as a way of understanding each other. It is. And the reason why I continuously emphasize work to be done in schools is because, remember, this is the time when children are in their formative years. When people become adults, their attitudes become very hardened. Yeah, they're set in their ways. But when children are in school, they have what we call in psychological, political terms, their minds are still a blank space, a blank slate. The technical term is called tabula rasa, meaning their minds are blank so that you can inscribe anything. So if you teach students in a particular way, if you teach students the wrong way, you are basically socially conditioning them in a particular way. And the job is not only of school teachers, but also parents. But as I said, this is an important part of any society where you teach students, young people, young minds in the correct way. And as I'm pointing out, one of the most important things about that learning is learning history and making sure that students in primary school and students in high school acquire historical consciousness and not just historical knowledge. Because what is historical consciousness? It is the idea that we understand and we know about the past, and that this past transcends, this understanding transcends time and place, and we understand that the past has implications for the present and the future. This is what students do not understand. The past for them is gone for all intent and purposes. This is the present. This is what we're going to do. But they do not realize how the past has shaped, their present. I was at a function once, and an expatriate lady, somebody was talking about the 1987 coup, and this lady said, Indians still thinking about that? Come on, move on. It's time to move on. But that's such a flippant, remark to make. How can you forget trauma? And it's not just traumas of 87, 2000. People have always also been writing on social media and talking about the trauma of 2006. Now they can openly express things that they went through in 2000, and the trauma is real. So also to say that, well, the British did this, the British that did that, but they're gone now, it's all over, is also not right. Because we need to understand, if we want to understand indenture, we need to understand the larger historical processes it was part of. When I speak to students at university in history and literature, they do not understand this. When I tell them, did you know that slavery was sanctioned by Queen Elizabeth I? They do not know this. Do you know that the British monarchy got enriched? And even King Charles just spoke 1 or 2 months ago about his family's connection to slavery. He said we need to do more research, but the research is already there. There's a connection already there. And just lastly, Vijay, it is amazing how people in other parts of the former British Empire, such as the Caribbean, and also the British people themselves are more aware about the atrocities that Britain committed. For example, during the coronation of King Charles, there was huge protests and people were singing, "Not our king, not our king." And if you look on YouTube and TikTok videos, you see people talking about the connection of the British Empire to slavery, to all these other brutal historical practices.
How that plays out, because some of the African and Caribbean countries are trying to move away from the British Empire.
And also, we need to make people accountable for what they did in the past.
We'll talk about that now. Since independence, we have also had 2 coups in 1987. One fell on May 14th, 1987. The exact date, the first group of indentured laborers arrived from India. One in 2000 and one in 2006. Based on these events, from your point of view, how did this affect our country, knowing that race relations were further strained from the first coup on May 14th, 87? And how did you deal with these issues, Teimumu?
Well, all these coups have set us back. Imagine Fiji without those coups. Where would we be now, progressively? So the coups have not done us any good. It has set us back. You just look at the human resource that we've lost. Overseas, the other countries in the Pacific have benefited and are still benefiting today. So it's a big loss to our country. And we hope that there will be no more coups, because every coup has set us back. Our children perhaps are the biggest victims of those coups. And the young people who are, 36 today, they remember nothing else but coups. And for them, a coup is normal. For us who were born before the 1987 coup, my youngest one was born in 86. So for her, coups are normal. And then she has children now who are also victims of coups born, after 2006. So coups have not done us any good. So we just hope, I won't mention any names, we just hope that nobody has any idea of carrying out a coup, because it just doesn't do anything for any of us. That's my take on coups.
Assistant Minister, of course, you are in the coalition government. These events have occurred from 1987, May 14th, and race relations were strained. How did you deal with these issues going back around that time?
Painful. There was different types of narratives. We lost a lot of people. We lost relations. I was in high school. I was lucky to still have other ethnic group friends, but mostly, even in schools, we had seen division. And for me, seeing the pain and hurts of 87 and then 2000 and then 2006, it made me determined to look at the pain, the fears, and what do we do to heal. And that's why post-2000, I've been looking at history and looking at what do we do? Things have happened. I personally have no power to go and unchange them or change them. And that's when we started looking at history and narratives, and eventually I went to Tinodo to say, how do we heal some of that pain so our future generations do not carry the trauma? We have had intergenerational trauma for years. And our people, our diaspora who've moved on in other countries still carry those pain, and they talk about it. in our genetics. So for me, it's important to look back to learn what fears caused it. And I actually talked to a lot of people from that era, on both sides. Why did Butan Roka say what he was saying? Why did Mr. Rambuka did what he did? And there's been a lot of lessons coming out of, the fear, how have we been, how different people were challenged to do what they did, and ongoing. So yes, it has pained people, it has traumatized people, and I think it's important to pause and reflect on that too.
Dr. Anurag?
I think Teimumu said it very succinctly. The trauma that the 87 and other coups have caused this nation, not to mention the brain drain that has happened, the loss of so much talent, so many qualified people who could have helped to build this country. And imagine, it's all a matter of conjecture, but imagine what Fiji would have been like if these coups would not have happened. And trauma at so many different levels. We have national trauma. And as Teimumu has said, some people have just grown up with coups. All they know are coups, the coup culture. It is the same as in many African and Latin American countries, where you have a cycle. You have a cycle of violence. You have a cycle of coups that never ends. It is almost like a cycle of violence that families get caught in when you have domestic violence, etc. It's the same thing. We are going through a national trauma cycle of that. And as I said, let's hope that this cycle breaks. And just, for people who say, that all happened in the past, it's time to move on. But people do not understand the personal trauma. Everybody has a story. My story would be sitting at home, as a kid, and having the army come into your house and the police and taking away your father, and he's returning at 4 a.m. in the morning, and I'm sitting on the driveway till 4 a.m. thinking, where is he? What's happened to him? And one of the policemen said, "We'll rough your father up." I still think of that. And then people have the audacity to say, let's move on, let's forget about it. We need reconciliation. But memory is such a powerful thing. You cannot forget. You can heal, you can try to heal, but you cannot totally forget. And that is why I think it is so important for people, young people, to learn history in a particular way, to learn the implications of what has happened in the past to the future and the present. That is so vital.
Miss Kiran, there's been a lot of hurt, and Dr. Anurag just talked about one that he clearly remembers, and a lot can be achieved through reconciliation. We'll talk about that, but there will still be that issue that still haunts some people because of how raw it may have been during those times. And what is being done to ensure that we do not sugarcoat what happened?
I think it's important to talk about what's important, the traumas. I personally, post-2000, I had the Indo-Fijian victim story. So I was looking at all the evictions in Vanuatu and Vitilevu. I was documenting, listening, and feeling the victimhood of the people of Indian origin. But I was also blessed, very angry, through ECRIA, there was a conversation happening about healing the nation. I didn't believe in it, but I walked into it. And I was the only other faith and other ethnic group in that space. And when I went into the indigenous spaces in Savusavu and all, there was a lot of anger and hate because of the rebels, the military base. There's a lot of things that happened. And I saw the pain and the victimhood of indigenous people, which was absolutely alien to me. And trying to understand that in being in that space, and I got a lot of hate, sitting through those spaces and trying to understand why do they feel victim, why are they angry with us, made me realize a lot of things. And for me, there's a realization there is pain in both our major communities. So while I acknowledge the pain of my people, I also acknowledge the people of the land who have fear and anger and hate. I should say. So while I started working and learning this side, I was also learning that side. And we have been talking very frankly, but for that, closed, safe spaces are needed. And we had a lot of that. So that's why you heard that even with Turangato case, we had closed, safe spaces where it doesn't go on social media and gets criticized and people don't feel good about it. And I've been involved in a lot of the dialogue over the last 23 years. And that's why I'm in a space where I think this reconciliation is important. I've been going to learn, and I've been working to the best of my ability to see how do we heal from that. It's true, memories will always remain. But when I'm hurt, then I hurt back. If I heal, it's important for me to be in a good enough space so I don't hurt the people around me. And that's why this healing is important, and naming things are important.
Dr. Anurag, what is being done to ensure we do not sugarcoat these things? What happened?
Unfortunately, we are sugarcoating it. And I'm going to go back to the history curriculum again, because I was going through all that last night. And I saw that in the social science year 10, you have less than half a page devoted to the indenture system under the following titles: the system in practice, housing in lines, quota men to women, work done according to task, corporal punishment, effects of the indenture system. One was breakdown of caste, and effects of the indenture system, prosperity. In spite of the abuses of the indenture system, most of the Indians were better off than they had been in India. That is quite a big generalization. It is a meta-historical conjecture, but I don't think anything like that needs to be written down. And also the end of the indenture system, the evils of any such system always attract more attention than doing its benefits, suggesting that there were benefits to the indenture system, to the system of slavery, this system of coercive labor. So two things are happening at the school level in history. One is whitewashing of history. I was looking at the idea of if there's anything about empire and slavery. I noticed that there was just a four or five lines summary on how about the different empires that existed, the Spanish and the Portuguese, British, French, etc. And then there was a summary table which said name, date, method of expansion, administration system, and region. That's all there is about the empire. And it also said something like great empires in history, great empires in history. How do these empires get great? How did the Roman Empire, how did the British Empire, how did they get great? They got great because of the abuses, because of the exploitation of people, because of the way they dehumanized and put people into servitude. So look at this whitewashing of history that is there. And unfortunately, some people won't like it because some of it was written by some of my colleagues. But this is whitewashed history. Whitewashed history, as well as a history with lacunas, historical gaps and silences. Where's the role of women? I don't see anything about women in this history. When I was talking a few days ago about the indenture system, I talked about the end of the indenture system. I mentioned how women played a vital role in putting the indenture system to an end. Otherwise, it's always about Gandhi, it's about Gokhale, it's about Burton, etc. But all the other women who took part in this campaign to stop or put an end to the indenture system, these women's names are erased from history. So I don't see anything about women. I don't see anything about why British Empire, Roman Empire got as great as they did. There's nothing about the underlying evil of the system, the indenture system or slavery. So this is whitewashed history, and I think we really need to, and I urge the minister to, use your powers to go back and look at this history and see how this history can be made more relevant, so that all the silences and gaps are no longer there, that everybody is speaking about through history, and that the story of everybody is told: women, men, peasants, big people, nationalists, so on and so forth. All groups of people are represented in this history.
Teimumu, sugarcoating of what happened from 87 onwards, what do you think should be done to ensure that people know what happened, the hurt that has come from those events, what Dr. Anurag and even what Assistant Minister has said?
And learn from it. think what you have been saying about the curriculum, that has to be rewritten so that it encompasses our own history. And that should begin from primary school rather than from year 10, so that we know what the other communities that have contributed to our country. Very little is said of them. So there has to be a lot of work done in the curriculum section of the ministry. I believe that was taken out, so that has to be brought back in. So a lot of work has to be done by the coalition government in terms of just righting the wrongs that have taken place in the past, and telling our history like it really has been, so that our children will learn from that. And what are the lessons learned that we should not be doing again in the future? So a lot of work has to be done, especially by the Ministry of Education, in terms of educating us and our children. That's how I'm seeing it.
You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. We'll be back after this break.
Meet Chalesi the businessman. Chalesi is sad because business is bad. Like really bad. He longs for the better times, times of joy. Yeah, colorful times. And now he drowns his pain by listening to some radio.
Listen to it on the Fiji Village app.
Have you booked your booth at Fiji Showcase?
It's back!
Well, what do you know? Fiji Showcase is back! Book a booth for your business now. Don't miss out.
Welcome back. I'm Vijay Narayan. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk, and our guest tonight, Marama Roko to Dreketi, Teimumu, Kepa, Assistant Minister for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, and the Girmit Chair for the celebration, Sashi, Kiran, and USP writer and historian, academic, Dr Anurag Subramani. Now, our constitution that was brought in 2013 has all citizens recognized as Fijians. What is your view on this? Does it achieve what it was focused on achieving, Dr. Anurag?
Would we give the ladies a chance to first?
They go first?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll go with Teimumu first.
Let me compose my thoughts a little.
That was something else that was imposed on us. And we know that things that are imposed on us, and if it has not been discussed by the people that need to have had that discussion, it's not going to go down very well. So whilst it sounds good, that everybody is termed a Fijian, that discussion needed to have taken place, and maybe it needs to be taking place again. But for the indigenous, because much of what is in the laws concerning us, indigenous Fijians, and it states there about what their rights are in terms of land, golingoli, and all that is written into the laws of the country. So, in terms of the indigenous accepting that, it's going to be difficult, because some things that were there for the indigenous, it cannot encompass everyone. So that has to be a conversation that needs to take place.
The word Fijian was imposed through a decree that became the constitution, which is now the constitution of the land. And from the indigenous Fijian perspective or Itoke perspective, it needs to be reviewed.
There needs to be a discussion taking place, yes, because of what is written in the laws, that is for the indigenous Fijians, and it just states there for Fijians, believing that this is for the indigenous. So that has to be a conversation that needs to take place.
Sashi, Kiran, the coalition government has its views on it. I spoke to the Prime Minister, Sitiveni Rambuka. He was here on the show 2 weeks ago. He said it's in the Constitution. We have it there, so everyone is Fijian. The former Prime Minister, Bani Marama, continues to stress it is important that everybody is called a Fijian because that is the unifier as well, for everybody to be unified. What is the stand from the government?
Well, the government stand has been shared by the Prime Minister already. It's in the Constitution, so we take it for now. But like Andy said, in the Toke laws, it's not written Toke, it's written Fijian. So it is causing confusion. And that's why it needs to be consulted. And, for me personally, it did not come out right because it was imposed. And for me to feel like a Fijian, I don't need to be called a name. For me to feel a sense of belonging, which has been wanting by our community, for me, it's the identity of who I am that makes me comfortable. Whether I'm from a descendant of indentured laborer, granddaughter of, and then I belong to Fiji, and this is how I relate to the Vanuatu. So for me personally, that name does not necessarily work unless everybody is consulted and is happy with it. Because we've seen too many conflicts and tensions because people are not consulted. And if there's a bit of tension and fear around that, that could cause us trouble in future. So it is important to consult and converse and rationalize it. If everybody feels comfortable with it, fine. But there has to be a consultation about it.
From within your circles, what term do you prefer?
For me, personally?
Yes.
I remember in the 1997 Constitution and all the submissions that had happened at that particular time, people rationalized the word Fiji Islander, and that was in the Constitution. I belong to Fiji, I'm a Fiji citizen, is good enough. I'll be comfortable calling myself Fijian once everybody, especially the indigenous people, are comfortable with it.
So you would prefer Fiji Islander, but it's not in the Constitution?
No, Fiji Islander was in the 1997 Constitution, which was a consulted constitution. The current constitution is an imposed constitution. We have to live with it. So by that constitution, we are called Fijians. But inside me, I'll be comfortable when everybody, especially the people of the land, are comfortable with it. Because any tension can be the cause of conflict, and we have seen too much of that in this nation.
Dr. Anurag?
Yeah, I think I subscribe to most of the views shared by the ladies. Anything that is imposed on anybody, any system, or anything else that is an imposition rather than accepted, unanimously through consensus, it just doesn't work, does it? And I think also if you look at Indo-Fijians themselves, I've heard many Indo-Fijians who are not happy with being called Fijian because they said their identity is subsumed within the larger group Fijian. This is another side of the story, that we are not happy being called Fijians because our identity is subsumed. We are no longer Indians. Okay? And so I also remember when I was doing the research for the Fiji Times book, I came across an article in 1968 where the former Prime Minister and President Aratusio Semara had proposed in 1968 a common name for all Fijians. I was surprised at that article, but that never came to anything. If you look at other countries, in United States, everybody's an American. That's whether you are a Chinese American, whether you're Indian American, African American, but you go out, you're still called an American. So I share all sides of the perspective here. It's good to have a common name. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But again, it has to be accepted by everybody, isn't it? It cannot be imposed on anybody.
It says a lot about our country from 1968.
Yeah.
If the late former president and prime minister had suggested we should have a common name.
Absolutely.
And we still cannot come to a conclusion what it should be.
Well, he did suggest Fijian should be the common name. That was his proposal.
It's still not. It
But
seems like
Vijay,
it's
we
still
haven't
not on the
consulted.
page.
Last consultation happened for 1997 constitution. It's been a long time.
Yes.
So what I'm
So
saying,
maybe
since
time to consult.
1968, that the fact
Yes.
that the fact stands, according to written record, that we're still talking about a common name and not having agreement is.
No, but we can't
Says
say
a
we're
lot.
not having an agreement. I would say we're not having a consultation. You have a consultation today, and for God knows, 80% of Fiji will say that's comfortable. But for me, having experienced conflicts in this country, I don't like the tension of it. If there's a consensus and indigenous people and our Indo people say, yes, that's a common thing, that's acceptable. But we have not had a consultation about it.
As citizens of the country, we all have a vested interest in this nation, and that's important. And any kind of decisions that are made, political decisions, economic, whatever kinds of decisions, social, cultural, whether you are changing the constitution, whether you're giving people a new name, it all has to be done through consultation. That is very important, rather than imposition.
Thank you, Dr. Anurag. On to my next question. Ms. Kiran, what is the way forward now after the coalition government has decided to have a Girmit Day public holiday and celebrations leading up to the day? With a lot, we have this opportunity, as you say, to go into the future. What is the way forward?
I think one of the beautiful things I've seen is when we started talking to different cultural groups, people are coming forward and thinking about it. And Methodist Church has come forward and said, we as a nation need healing. We as a nation need a thanksgiving to the people of Girmit to how they contributed. And they've proposed a Thanksgiving ceremony. But they have also proposed and have approached all the different cultural groups, Fiji Council of Churches, all the Indian cultural groups, to come together to talk about what's happened, to say thanksgiving, to apologize, to begin a dialogue. And that, I think, is significant going forward. They have said, we're willing to work with for 10 years. I've talked to the different heads of organization who they've invited. There's a lot of, people who've been affected have said, some people had initial reservations, but generally there seems to be a lot of movement forward that people want to come together, have this conversation, have some sort of a commitment that going forward in the next few years, we're going to talk and dialogue about our pains and see how do we actually move forward, as a community. And I think that has emerged out of that dialogue, and it's a very important step to go forward.
Let's talk about the Methodist Church of Fiji, Teimumu, leading the Thanksgiving and Reconciliation service on Sunday, confirmed by the President of the Methodist Church of Fiji, Reverend Ili Vunisuwai, who said that their standing committee met and they said that based on what is happening in the week, the church took the step that they wanted to ask for forgiveness from the Indo-Fijian community for the hurt that has been caused, including the coups of 87 and 2000, where some of the church members and the church did play a part, and taking that forward on Sunday. Some are saying this is a significant step. Others are questioning if it is necessary or just a pointless exercise. What is your view?
I think the Methodist Church has to be commended for that initiative that they're taking in trying to bring people together through the religious activity that they're going to be spearheading on Sunday, and to ask for forgiveness. For Fijians to ask for forgiveness, you're setting people on the right path. And for the head of the Methodist Church to do that, I think we can only go forward from here. And other people have also agreed to be a part of that celebration. And I think there's just better days ahead for us as a people working together.
Dr. Anurag?
I mean, any kind of gesture by anybody, any groups or individuals to reach out and, engage in a process of reconciliation and healing is good for this nation. And if the Methodist Church is doing I mean, as we all know, Methodist Church has been a very politicized group in the past. But if the Methodist Church is doing that, it's a genuine thing, then I think that's a good thing. And not just the Methodist Church, I think anybody for that matter, any little gesture of reconciliation, reaching out your hand and saying that, okay, we have gone through all this trauma in the past, we have suffered together, but we can also, go forward together in a better way, and let us heal and let us engage in the process of healing. I mean, it's a good thing, isn't it? Any kind of reconciliation in any form is good for this country.
Question on the younger generation. What is being done to ensure that the younger generation also gets involved in these ceremonies, celebrations, and cultural events to, first of all, appreciate and then know where we've come from? I think this afternoon it's quite clear a lot has to be done. And connected to my question before this, some people saying, oh, this is a pointless exercise. Do we need this? Others are saying it's significant. What is the importance there?
We ran, University of the South Pacific Roko campus ran a debate last week, I think, and all the high schools participated. And we were surprised at the high quality of debate. And the high school students said that they actually researched and they were surprised. And they came with a lot of passion that they wanted to learn more. That gave me a lot of hope. And I'm told they're already preparing for a conversation or a debate for Ratasukuna Day. So that shows me interest. In the program, we have included traditional Indian sports to get students involved. It's school holidays, but we work with the ministry to get school students to come and see the exhibition. And even in each of the evening program, we have tried to make sure that the young are involved. And we are constantly asking them, I've been having some conversations on, what do they feel? Most people feel kind of shocked that they did not know this and want to get engaged more. So we will have to find more pathways. And even in that reconciliation space, there are different people in that space saying different things. Most people I've seen who are impacted by 87 or older people instantly seem to get emotional and say, like coming together in that reconciliation space and talking about it is very significant for them. Younger people don't necessarily are in that space. So we're trying to make sure they come into that space as well. But I think a lot more activities, not only this day. This day is important for me that, at least we can pause and do these activities. But now we'll have to plan to make sure that the young know our history and the traumas of our history and why we are the way we are.
Dr. Anurag.
Yeah, I was looking at the Fiji Village article from yesterday, or was it today, where the assistant minister said it is very critical to involve the young generation in the Girmit Day celebration. So I was wondering exactly what she meant. So do we involve young people during these 4 days and then forget about them? Is this just a short-term kind of gesture? Bring young people together and say, okay, let's celebrate, let's do this, and then 360 days of the year we forget about how to develop the historical consciousness or how to make them aware of the past. So so for me, as I said, I mean, I think I've covered much of this, and I think that, and you might get tired of this. It all has to do with a long-term. It's a long-term project. It's a long-term project. It's not a short-term project. It's not something that we will make young people aware of in 3, 4, 5 days. It's a long-term project. Just like when I tell my English literature students who are so poor in English writing, their competency is so bad, I said to them, this is a mark of people who have not read all their lives. In order to speak, in order to write well, be competent in the English language, it has to be a lifelong project. You need to lift a book when you are small. You need to start reading. And people who are competent in the English language, who can write and read and speak well, it clearly shows that they have been reading all their lives. So in the same way, getting a better understanding of history and where we come from, to me, for the young people, is a kind of a lifelong thing. It's not just a 4-day thing. It's a lifelong thing. And again, tying that with reading, I think students just these days do not read anything at all. They don't read any literature. You know, I have literature students who don't like reading. And I say, why are you doing literature when you don't like reading? You have to read literary texts, you have to read historical texts, but you need to read. You need to read, and you have to make yourself aware of what has happened in the past and what will happen in the future because of things that happened in the past. You have to be historically conscious. And that is a kind of a process that starts from young days.
Teimumu, you're a former teacher and also a former Minister for Education.
Vijay, just looking at the Girmit celebrations, I think that's a good start. We have to continue, like the conversation that has been going around this table. And I think we can do that through, I've been talking to Sashi about it, that we need to have schools interacting with one another, conversing with one another, discussing with one another what is happening. For example, we look at Nodo. There's a primary school and a secondary school there. They can partner with Wunimono, which also has a primary school and a secondary school, high school. So the two of them can have a kind of an exchange program. One is very good on traditions and culture, language, and the other is good with technical subjects, you know, internet and everything that's going now. So the two of them can share ideas, share facilities, and if we have that as a pilot project, that can be done in other parts of the country. Again, it has to come through the Ministry of Education to make it sustainable, so that it's not just good for one term. It's good for, you know, many more years in the future. And where students are just learning from one another, learning their history. Otherwise, they're disengaged, they're not interacting with one another. And I think that's the space that needs to be given to young people. We start with a pilot project, those two schools. One is the rescuers, one is the rescued, and go from there.
If I may
that's
add,
the way I think.
Andy had said that when we first did 2016, and it's been happening. So not only Sovoli primary and Nodo secondary and Wunimono, but Nakasi also. There's a lot of interaction and learning, and there's certain days they commemorate together. And each festival, so like Diwali and other festivals, is actually there's cooperation between the teachers and students. So that's been going on since we did Reva Day, to try and make sure that that becomes an institutional knowledge.
So that's a bottom-up, now it has to be top-down.
It has to go larger scale so that there's widespread
Bottom-up,
acceptance.
top-down, the two meet
That was
somewhere.
the first thing she said. This has to happen, and we made sure that's happening.
Vijay, I think I've been a bit harsh on just students as well for lacking a kind of historical consciousness. Just a few weeks ago, a USB academic uttered the shocking statement that history is irrelevant. I think one of the other issues is the way that history is looked at as a subject in high school. You know, in the taxonomy of disciplines, history is usually way down. It's the sciences which are more important. And if you're a bright student, you are actively encouraged by teachers to go into the sciences, because history, English literature, they do not matter. It's for students who get lower marks, you know.
STEM subjects.
This kind of mentality, this kind of thinking needs to totally change. And if teachers are thinking that way, if academics are thinking that way, what do you expect? How do you expect students to change?
And don't worry, you're not being harsh. This is straight talk. You can talk straight. Last question for all of you, starting with you, Dr. Anurag. From your point of view, what can be done to have true reconciliation and racial unity? Going forward, there were comments made earlier this afternoon about sometimes still parents calling the other race the boogeyman, the Indo-Fijian, the Kaindia, or the other one Jati, or it's okay. And we're still living with these things. We cannot deny it. As we said, we shouldn't be sugarcoating. What should we be doing?
If we have a national forum such as a National Reconciliation Day or any other kind of national forums, right, where people come together and discuss these ideas, How can we engage in true reconciliation? If we have a conference of academics who come and present papers, which is all good. But to me, these are all very esoteric exercises, particularly the Girmit conference. You have a bunch of academics who would present papers, who would publish papers. The greatest achievement is getting published in journals. Okay, what is the implications for their writing? It could be. But all these national dialogues, these national forums, etc., that we have is good, but we need to have it on a regular basis. But the most important thing, as you've already said, is changing people's attitudes and changing people's mindset. When they talked about the idea of decolonization, when they said that the colonial powers had left, but people were still colonized because their minds were not decolonized. People were still colonized in the mind because they began to believe a lot of things that the colonial powers had told them. So the mind needed to be decolonized. So in countries like Jamaica, India, one of the ways that people go through decolonization is changing the education curriculum, changing street names, changing names of cities, so Bombay, Mumbai. But the most important thing, and colonial powers recognize this, they did not wield power through a gun. They did not wield power in other nations by planting a flag. They wielded power in very insidious, clever ways by colonizing people's minds, by brainwashing and conditioning people. And I think also here in Fiji, we as Itoke, as Indo-Fijians, we have also been conditioned in certain ways from a very young age. What you've already mentioned, I've been through that where family members would say, oh, be careful of the Fijian, he might steal something. Oh, be careful when he's in your house. Or, the Fijian would say, oh, the Indian is just, he's greedy. Oh, what would they say? Money face or something like. These derogatory terms, they're still there. And why do people think that way? It's because of the way that they have been socialized, conditioned for a very young age. So again, it is not a one-day project. It's not a two-day project. It's a lifelong project. If the young generation, if parents can really decide and really think, oh, we are vested in this project called Fiji, and if we're really vested in this project called Fiji, if we really want true reconciliation, we have to start with our kids. We have to teach them in a particular way. We have to teach them to respect other races. We have to teach them that these kind of derogatory remarks have no place in Fiji, that the Fiji that they want. So undoing a lot of the hurt and the harm that is being done psychologically and mentally to young people is a good way to do that. It's a long-term project.
Ms. Kiran?
I think for me personally, the last 20 years has been learning. And in the early days, and there's a lot of still these programs going on restorative justice. So we would come into a space, and I've sat in extremely ethno-nationalist spaces. And there are facilitation where people get to look at themselves. And in the staff, we would do these stereotype things. And when they'll present, we'll be ashamed how we address each other in our houses. So there has been this whole consciousness, training, education, coming in for dialogue. And that's, I think, important. But for me, this National Reconciliation Day is very important because Fiji is, generally speaking, very religious. What our religious leaders say matter. So religious leaders coming and saying, well, we need to dialogue, we need to heal, we need to move on, will give a very strong signal to us as a people. And there is a lot of commitment that these dialogues have to continue. And for the past 20 years, people of intercultural awareness has been doing this interracial, interreligious dialogue. Interfaith has been doing it. So there's been little bits of work happening. But a national conversation like this and having more dialogues with education, with everything else that has to happen, is important. And it's important to start revisiting our stereotypes publicly and engaging, like Dr. said. So I think this day is very important. And how do we go from here forward? How many forums with the youth, with the elders we carry on with? And those very simple activities of, bringing people together to dialogue is important going forward.
Vijay, if I may add something, I think, everything in this country becomes racialized. Every little issue for some reason gets racialized. And I think we have to relook at that. Look at some of the hate, a lot of the hatred that people spew on social media particularly. every little thing like rugby, sports, not only politics, but everything else gets so racialized. How do we make sure that people unlearn a lot of those stereotypes, a lot of those attitudes and prejudices? We will unlearn only those things if all people, everybody, all the stakeholders take part in it, including national leaders, teachers, historians, parents, children, teachers, everybody. And it's going to be a long thing. It's not going to be a 1 day, 2 day, 3 day thing. The national reconciliation is a good thing. I have no objections to that. But what I'm saying is, it's a very long process. It's going to be a, very long process.
Yes. From your point of view, to break away the suspicions between the communities, what can be done to ensure we have true reconciliation and racial unity going forward?
I think people are talking up here. The national leaders, the community leaders are talking to one another. I think it has to go right down to the schools. We are talking about the blank, the children who are coming through from class 1. Just have them mixing around, have them going to visit a Fijian village, Itoke village, and just seeing what happens in that village. I think if we spend more time in each other's space, that's a big learning process, and we just go from there. You can't do too much at one time. It has to be taken through slowly. So I think the schools would play a big part in this. Big role to play.
What about for those who have left school?
Left school. That's a good question.
May I just say what the doctor said in terms of stereotypes? Huh? Why is it when we say road accident, Indian or Fijian? If it's your own, you hurt. If it's the other, okay. Because we have dehumanized the other. When we say he will eat your child or take care of your child, we have dehumanized and made the other ethnic group evil. And I think that's probably the DNA trauma that we are carrying. And that's why healing is important. When I heal and humanize the other, I'm feeling sad, the other person's feeling sad, then we start treating each other like humans. And while schools and all this is important, I think this national healing messaging from both sides that we need to heal and humanize each other without the other. Why is it me, and you, the other? Those conversations are important, and it'll take a long time, but it has to begin somewhere. And I'm grateful we're beginning those conversations.
So that's the process. This is not the end. This is the beginning, and making sure that it's not just about the public holiday and about the significance of what we can achieve over here. Thank you very much, Teimumu, Ms. Kiran and Dr. Anurag, for making yourselves available for this for our audience. And of course, we have the celebrations continuing into the weekend until Monday. Until next week, have a good evening.